Kelowna is a large city now, and our policing model needs to mirror that.
Welcome to Kelowna Talks, where we explore the why behind the decisions that shape your city. Together, we open the curtain and dig deep into current issues, plans, and policies that come out of City Hall. Thanks for joining us as we talk about Kelowna and the topics that matter to you.
Hi everyone, I'm Bob Evans, Partnerships Director at the City of Kelowna and host of our Kelowna Talks podcast. I acknowledge that our community is located on the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Syilx Okanagan people. Well, we are talking today about a subject that has likely touched everyone at some point in some way, and that's crime and community safety. We've seen the headlines about crime and safety in Kelowna, but does this actually reflect reality? In this episode, we're going to dig a little deeper into a topic of community safety and policing in Kelowna, what's being done, and what each of us can do. Welcome, Triance, our own Superintendent of the Kelowna RCMP Detachment. She has more than 20 years of policing experience, including the Whistler, Sea to Sky region, Bella Bella, Richmond, YVR, and Vernon. Now I understand, Kara, you grew up in Kelowna, worked in several other detachments in different roles, and now you're home, overseeing the Kelowna RCMP. It's been a little more than a year since you've joined the detachment. Tell us a little bit about how your journey back to Kelowna and a little bit about you and maybe more importantly, what you do when you're not in uniform. Welcome.
Thank you. So Kara Triance, I'm pleased to have served the last 22 years in BC and back in my hometown. Not something many officers get to experience, so I'm pretty thrilled about that opportunity. I was a graduate of Mount Boucherie Secondary School, and my dad was a teacher in this school district and my mom a nurse. So lots of roots here, and happy to be home and policing here.
Yeah, that's wonderful. How do you get back home? What's the process for you to actually get to Kelowna in the detachment? Is that a difficult thing to achieve?
So the particular position that I am in, officer in charge, I interviewed for. There was originally 40 candidates on the list of qualified applicants for the position. And so I worked through that list among the others, and we competed for this position through interviews and through submissions of resumes and all of that. So there's a competitive process for my position, but for other officers, it's about the right time at the right place, and certainly serving time in some of our harder to staff locations like the North District or up north. Of course, Canada is a large country with a Royal Canadian Mounted Police across the country. And what's unique about the Mounties is we have a staffing model that allows us to move among divisions to the north, east coast of Canada, central Canada. So a lot of that has to do with coming back to desirable locations or places that people really are seeking. We talk about that sunshine tax here in Kelowna that people are sought after. And so for Mounties, it's no different. If you go and spend some time in those hard to staff locations, then you can absolutely work your way back into Kelowna, into those positions through that.
Yeah, it looks like you've been in a few places yourself, and we're happy to have you back. So it must be really nice to be home, so to speak.
Thanks. Yeah, my career is primarily focused in operations, and my first 5 were down in the Lower Mainland in Richmond, and there had an opportunity to work a variety of different positions and duties, from serious crimes through to different covert operations, and then up into the North District, which was a unique experience in itself. We were there for 2 years, my husband and myself, my now husband, who's a biologist and a teacher, and we had an incredible time there. Over to Island District, which is a wonderful place to be, another sought-after location, and we were in Victoria, border integrity, and I did a really phenomenal project there with the U.S. Coast Guard and Shiprider, where we policed both in Washington and in BC, doing cross-border law enforcement, mostly on marine drug interdiction. So lots of unique experiences
sounds like it.
in the island. Back up to the North District for 4 years this time. And then, of course, Vernon, North Okanagan was home for 4 years as well. We were in Vernon in the city, as well as in, I ran Armstrong Detachment in the rural area. And then over to Sea to Sky, which is where my commission was. So I policed Bowen Island, Squamish, Whistler, and Pemberton before coming back to Kelowna. Wonderful career, in my opinion. You sign up to become a Mountie to explore this country, and I feel like I've only gotten the opportunity to police in BC, but there's incredible opportunities in policing to see our country and experience and integrate into our communities in pretty unique ways.
Sounds like a bit of a pitch for the RCMP.
We are recruiting. I certainly would put a pitch in at any point for it.
Yeah.
It's been a really rewarding job experience for me.
No, it's wonderful, and thank you. And now you're back, and you're in Kelowna, and you've been here for a year. So, what's your impression of now that you're back and you've doubled down, and what's your impression of crime and safety in Kelowna? I know it's a big, broad question, but where are you with that?
Yeah, so a year into the job, or just over a year now, really, Kelowna has grown. It's big city policing now, and we're honing in on efficiencies and processes that allow us to be more effective as a large city police force. And I think that's an important thing to remember, because so many of us who grew up here in Kelowna and have been here for long periods of time, while I've left and come back, I still feel my roots here. And we remember small town Kelowna, but Kelowna is a large city now, and our policing model needs to mirror that. So there's lots of things that we are doing in the city of Kelowna and within the police station to make sure that we have modernized and grown to meet those demands for community safety. Certainly with our partnership and work with Interior Health and our partners in the justice system, it is about making sure that we respond to crime in a manner that aligns with large city structures. And when it's crime and it's coupled with health, whether that be mental health or addictions, any sort of substance use, we really have to make sure that we are meeting people where they're at and addressing those services in our community to meet those basic needs. Housing, so shelter, food, addiction services, detox services, substance replacement therapies. Those are the most problematic issues that we have when it comes to community safety in Kelowna at this time. And of course, we're looking at reported crime. We know that crime happens in this community and in all communities across the world that is unreported. But certainly when we're looking at reported crime and the data and analytics that we have coming in, it is most problematic and probably the area that we need to focus the most on when we look at that fueled by addictions and certainly substance use.
Big city stuff.
Big city stuff.
Yeah, that's what comes with it. What's the current complement of officers? What's the size of our operation in Kelowna?
Yeah, so City of Kelowna funds 210 police officers. I'm the regional officer in charge, and so I'm also in charge of Lake Country, West Kelowna, and Peachland. And across the region, we are at approximately 300.
So aside from starting your new job during a pandemic, have there been any other unexpected challenges or surprises that you've encountered?
So, right, there's nothing that's been simple about this pandemic, and Kelowna in itself has experienced a lot of challenges throughout the pandemic as it relates to protests and the anti-vaccine population that is opposed to the regulations being put in place by the province of BC in attempts to keep the community safe and to try and get COVID at a manageable level. And certainly that's fallen to the police to address. So I think if I envisioned my first year of policing, it wasn't responding as much to protests as it is. And that's become a significant draw and demand on resources. We've had 40 protests this year that all require operational plans. They require investment in resources. They require enhanced policing above and beyond what we currently have planned for.
Yeah, and again, not expected, not budgeted for, not scheduled for, so it takes
just
you away
off the
from
sides of our desks.
some of the other big city issues that you were referring to.
Certainly.
Bit of a challenge. We had a 2020 citizen survey that showed 87% of citizens who responded feel safe in our community. That's a pretty positive number. At the same time, we hear about property crime and bike thefts, car break-ins, and all those things that violate a person's sense of safety. A priority for our city council is to see crime decrease, as we've talked about, and and for residents to feel safe, which is, an obvious thing, I think. So how do you see that happening? How do you lay out a plan to address those concerns, those issues?
Well, it's absolutely in partnership with the community. So not only the city of Kelowna, but the province of BC and their investments in health resourcing, housing, and shelter beds, all sorts of addiction services. These are really important investments in our community that's going to help us, particularly with property crime. So when we think about property crime, and we look at the statistics that are fueling property crime, if we look even over the last 60 days at the most significant and problematic offenders, those who are committing 30, 40 offenses in 1 month, they are individuals who have complex needs, both in addictions and mental health. And those who are breaking into houses and breaking into vehicles are addicted individuals who are stealing property to fuel those addictions and fuel drug trade. So lots of suppression work on the drug trade within Kelowna, but more specifically, I think getting to the roots of the problem, because we can work on that suppression and the organized crime component. That is a very important area of focus. However, we've got to take out the need for it. And the need for it is early on addressing trauma and addressing people's issues that result in complex addictions later on in life. And that can be a whole host of different things. Some of it genetic, some of it the situation that they were born into or grew up into. And for policing, I envision that we invest heavily and well in our work in partnership with agencies like the Child Advocacy Center or Elizabeth Fry and our victim services providers, our schools. When we partner with those agencies that are providing services to children and youth in our community and meet them at where they're at to make sure that those services are provided in a extremely trauma-informed way and sensitive way early on, and try and change that trajectory of the pathway that individual might be on, I believe we have the greatest chance for success in not seeing that person become underhoused and addicted later on in life. We're not going to be able to measure that quickly or simply. Some of this work is 30 years down the road, but I do believe that investment is very important. And the research and data show that over and over again as we start to look at trauma science and addictions and police contacts and how people end up in jail, what causes that early on.
Yeah, well, and from my perspective, it's reassuring to hear you talk about that. Again, I maybe I'm naive in this subject, but it just seems to be new to the policing psyche to address some of these complex needs issues, and obviously it's one of the most important issues in our community that just permeates every aspect. And other people I've talked to in different aspects and the other side of the microphone, we've touched on that as well. And that was my next question, was about the criminal justice system as well, because you've been a little bit critical on that. I know this is maybe a bit of a sensitive topic, but with our the system that's in place, your ability to work within that system, are we missing something? What needs to happen from your perspective, I guess, within our city, because that's what we can control, but then breaking that out to a provincial level, even a federal level?
Mm-hmm. So if we had a couple of hours today, we could get into this very passionate discussion that I think is extremely interesting. So from a research perspective, one of the important studies I always like to highlight is the Alberta Prison Project, which is ongoing and has had a lot of really meaningful feedback. And it's looking at individuals who are incarcerated in Alberta and BC and their first contact with police. And this is really getting into the roots of trauma-informed policing and also response to trauma. So not just policing and how police officers respond to trauma, but how do we respond as child and family services agencies? How do we respond as community service providers and educators and healthcare workers to people impacted by trauma in order to change that trajectory for those individuals and make sure we get them on a path to health and wellness. So that comes through housing and that comes through other areas. When we talk about, your question relates really to that hard-on crime and the gaps in the justice system. So there's been some changes during COVID as well as in recent court decisions, such as Zora would be an example. Supreme Court decisions that have impacted our ability to have the justice system hold people in custody for offenses like property crime or breach offenses. So if they've been released on a bail term and they're breaching those bail terms, they're out after their curfew or they're found in possession of break-in tools, being able to hold them on those breaches is less possible now. We have to vary their terms of their bail multiple times often before we see them held in custody. And also COVID, meaning the remand centers tried to decrease the population, the province gave orders to decrease the population in remand facilities. And so remand facilities at 50% capacity mean that the justice workers are having to decide early on. Our partners in Crown Counsel and the Federal Prosecution Service are having to decide early on whether or not cases will go forward.
So they're triaging them in essence. Yeah.
Trying to make sure that they stay out of the remand facilities. So a couple of things: court decisions, COVID impacting remand centers, as well as just the modernization of society has definitely delivered changes in perception on what we should do with people committing crime in our community and how we should access services. The problem being, not all of those services are available in our community yet, and in communities across Canada. We don't have adequate healthcare services to be able to respond to those who are not being held in jail. So if you're not being held in jail and you can't access detox, health.
Yeah, where do you go?
Exactly.
You're on the street.
You're on the street,
Yeah.
and you're committing more crime on the street because you're living a life of substance use and addiction fueled by crime, and you're left for the police to manage and or impacted businesses, homeowners, residents, vehicles that are being broken into in order to address these people at large in our community.
Well, and that's, you and I had a bit of a brief discussion before we started the podcast, but it's difficult to be a police officer from my perspective sitting in this chair because you're trying to balance out policing, as you were trained, and now you layer in complex needs, and now, we layer in Joe Average, who owns a business, owns a building downtown and gets vandalized, and the frustration level that percolates from a perception standpoint of, are we doing enough? So I guess, it's...
that is the things that keep me awake at night.
Yeah,
So, when I hear of a glass business break and enter downtown Kelowna, it breaks my heart. I know how hard those business owners are working to try and keep their storefronts open. And yet, knowing the likely suspects who are breaking into these businesses, how do we get them held in jail when they're having to be caught 10, 15 times before they're remanded into custody, and having adequate resources to do that? So we either have to be extremely hard on crime with adequate resourcing for policing to be able to put suppression efforts on offenders and get them held into jail, and our justice systems need to respond to that. Or we need to be able to have adequate healthcare and compliance tools to hold them to accessing that healthcare and receiving that. Right now, healthcare is a voluntary service, and it is something that we have to engage in. But if you don't want to engage in healthcare, we have to look at consequence, and that's our jail system. And we, as a society, are not imposing jail terms based on people who won't access treatment. And this is where I think as a society, we need to be understanding these issues and start to invest where we feel we need to. This isn't a decision I can make as your police chief in isolation. I think as a community, we need to come to an understanding about what we want. Are we hard on crime? Are we supporting people from trauma and addictions? Are we providing services? Are we somewhere in the middle? And these are big
tough
topics.
Issues. Yeah. And, and I think our current city council has addressed this, and I think they've been very supportive with supporting housing projects and to get people housed and the journey home. And there's been a lot of effort on our behalf. And I look at it from my lens that we are a progressive city and we want to be a progressive city, and we're trying to be the best mid-sized city in Canada. And as part of that has to be our effort to be compassionate, but also, as you're saying, there's the reality of there's crimes that are being committed. So it's such a, that's why they call it complex, I guess. There's such a complex landscape in front of us of of the justice system, and then compassion for people that have mental health issues and really don't know any better. And we can't mix the metaphors there with how we deal with crime.
I agree with you. And in cities like Vancouver, you see outreach services like psychiatric outreach services and addiction outreach services walking the streets of Vancouver. I believe we are at a place where we need that in Kelowna. Our city council has been very proactive, not only in their communication and their advocacy, but in their investments. And yet we still need more investments. We need more from BC Housing. We have people right now that if I locate somebody who is underhoused and with complex needs, I don't have a bed to put them in tonight. And that is a problem for a police officer who's trying to move somebody off of someone's private property
To where?
The streets of Leon. We remember when that was a tent city. We have the outdoor sheltering site, but we need enhanced complex care facilities. And when I talk to my partners at Interior Health, not only do they need enhanced complex care facilities, but they need the staff to work in those facilities. Yes. They're understaffed and they need more people to be able to provide those really important services. So when you take somebody with extremely complex needs of violence and addictions and challenging behaviors, we also need to make sure that we are adequately staffing those facilities to make sure that those residents are not having an impact on one another or our community safety.
Yeah, well said. And I think that our province is working towards that, and hopefully there'll be some provincial announcements soon for funding projects. And of course, we're hoping to get one in Kelowna. So
that would be wonderful.
We'll see how that goes.
We welcome that news.
Yeah, and so that brings me to another question: will more officers help? Policing's costly. We all know that. It's the city's largest line item on their budget. In 2020, it was $38.6 million, and council approved 11 RCMP in 2020. So that's a significant investment by all of us as taxpayers. Help us understand what difference having more officers make to the safety in our city and to your ability as the chief to make things happen from a policing perspective.
Absolutely. So yes, in answer to your question, are more officers needed? Absolutely, more officers are needed. We have had significant investments from the city council, but we're still playing catch up in that a study was done several years back indicating we needed more police officers. And I could look at that independently and test that against data and analytics that we have today and say, absolutely, we need more officers. However, what is the right number? This city has a very large line object for policing, arguably because the other major public services like healthcare and education, housing, all of these ones are provincially mandated. And so policing being a municipal expense is significant. There's no doubt about it. Fire being another significant expense for municipalities. And that weighs heavily on this beautiful city that we're in and the taxpayers that pay to live here. But I believe that the mental health and wellness of our police officers, we're about in the top third of the province when it comes to caseload, calls for service, crime rate, and things that impact health and wellness of police officers, staffing levels, so being able to keep people at work healthy and well and not off duty with long-term PTSD and other issues that are affected when their stress is high and they're responding to really significant calls for service. When I start to see our calls for service that are priority one, meaning needing immediate police response now, often multiple units, stacking, that's unheard of. And stacking priority one calls for service cannot become a practice or a norm for us.
So what does that mean, stacking? What do you...
Great question. So we have a dispatch service that when a call taker takes a call and they're asking you for your name and your information, it seems like nothing's happening with that file. But that file has already been punched over to the call takers, to the dispatchers who have categorized that file. At call taking, right when they're taking the call initially, they will put that as a priority 1, 2, or 3 call. 3 being your lowest priority, even 4 is even lower priority 1 being your highest priority call. You need to get there. Industry standard is within 7 minutes. So that means we need to have available police officers around the city, because if they're all responding from, let's say, downtown and they need to get to a call in Rutland, we need to have units that are free and able to attend a call for service or break off from the less priority call for service in their area of responsibility. When the call taker is taking your information, your name, your date of birth, it seems like a slow process and you're having to provide a lot of information, but they are populating that file with data. And at the same time, a dispatcher is dispatching that file and communicating that to the police officers who are attending that call for service. Sometimes those go into a queue and they get stacked. When a night shift comes on and we've got 100 files stacked and you're wondering why nobody showed up for your break and enter or your suspicious person in the alleyway, that's extremely problematic. We need to make sure that we're able to get to those calls for service in a timely manner and that we can respond with the right number of resources. Also, that our police officers are able to appropriately discharge after an event and decompress. That might mean 30 seconds to catch their breath in between calls for service.
Right.
It might mean 5 minutes where they actually
And everybody's
take some
call is
time.
the most important.
Everybody's call is
Because
most important.
You have no idea when you're behind the other end of the telephone that what the call load is on your side. So everybody's frustrated, and it can add up to lots of pressure on both sides of the phone.
Absolutely. Yeah. On times when I've observed a collision on the street and I've called that in to the police, I want that to be activated and dealt with immediately. To me, what I'm seeing unfolding in front of me is the most significant issue. However, if you have 10 police cars on the road or 20 police cars on the road, they're all tied up with different things. They're all into different areas of responsibility, and you've got nobody to respond to your call for service. As a citizen, you start to lose confidence in your police service, and we need to be really careful about making sure that we have adequate resources to be able to attend the calls for service that we see are coming in. And year over year, we've seen increases in calls for service and an uptick as we start to see more and more calls for service. Our prisoner numbers are high and our calls for service are high.
Wow. Yeah. It's, again, people can't see your face, but there's, it's a concern, obviously. And, I hate to hear that this keeps you up at night. And, that's what leadership is, though, I guess, is trying to unpack these things. And it's obviously a really complicated, multifaceted issue. And it's not necessarily more officers, but it's more officers plus mental health supports and more community facilities and so on.
It's not a really quick wave the wand and we can find a quick solution to this.
Yeah.
There's multiple facets, and we are doing so many phenomenal things and seeing so much progress. When I hear of police officers just this week alone arresting people in stolen vehicles and picking off our most wanted criminals, the people who have warrants and are committing the most amount of crime over the last 30 days, according to our data and analytics. I feel so proud of those officers who are coming to work in the front line, responding to those serious calls for service in the middle of a global pandemic, not confident on their health and wellness through fire season and heat waves and significant events in our community. Those police officers are what keep me coming back every day, making sure that we can have the staff in place for them, that we have the partnerships established, that we are speaking truthfully and accurately to the issues that we see as your police service.
Wow. Well, I think they're fortunate to have a leader like you. You're exuding support and confidence and leadership attributes. So thank you for that. And we're close to the end of our time. We try to limit how much time we have. Did I miss anything? I always like to ask what else you do for fun. So we want to sort of rip off the cover, so to speak. And in this case, when you're not policing, you're not leading, what do you do for fun? Like what keeps you in the Okanagan? What excites you about living in our great city?
I have a wonderful spouse who's moved 8 times over the last 20 years with me.
Yeah, wow.
And we have 2 incredibly active and healthy young girls. We love to ski and we love to bike and we love to camp in BC. And I'm a swimmer as well. So for us, our locations that we've policed and lived and experienced in BC have always been around, does it have a ski hill? Does it have great mountain biking and good spots to swim and enjoy? So a unique a little tidbit about us, we sailed our boat to Mexico in 2012. We had a 43-foot sailboat, and we left the coast of central coast of BC and sailed that 43-foot boat down to Mexico.
Wow, there's a story.
Yeah, it was an incredible experience. And I grew up sailing here on the lake in Kelowna with a boat at Shelter Bay Marina at the time with my dad and mom. My whole family lived together growing up, but it was just my dad and I who liked to sail. And so learned just on this lake here how to sail, and certainly have taken that spirit of adventure into my adult life and with my family as we explore this.
That's a big difference between sailing on Lake Okanagan and then sailing on the ocean down the whole western coast.
Yes, it was a bit of a progression. When we lived in Vancouver, we also had a boat on the Burrard Inlet, and then we sailed it up to BC and central coast of BC and salmon fished and sailed for quite a few years up there before setting offshore. So circumnavigated Haida Gwaii right after we got married.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that just creates so many questions, so we don't have time for it. But I'd love to understand more about that sailing trip, because that's just wonderful, and they never go well. Full trip, so I'm sure there's lots of stories, and
if you
maybe
think
a little
that
bit
being the
mutiny on
police
the
chief in
bounty.
Kelowna is hard, you should try sailing your boat to Mexico.
Yeah, well, thank you, Superintendent Triance, and thanks for your time today. And it's wonderful to get to know you a little bit better. And thank you on behalf of the city for the work that you do and your team does. So,
Thank you very much.
Thanks. It's been a pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Kelowna Talks. For more conversations about topics that matter in your community, subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you liked what you heard, give us a 5-star rating and share Kelowna Talks with your friends and neighbors. If you'd like more information about this podcast and other big community conversations, visit kelowna.ca/community stories.